Okay, so we had one young man ask the question, "Can I play Fortnite in heaven?"
Ooh.
And
That's the one that quit Facebook a decade.
Yes, yeah.
No,
Video games.
absolutely not.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, kid. No, just
Yep.
stop. Put down the Fortnite.
Put down.
Go in the backyard, son. Find a stick. Play with it. Your life will be.
Yes.
This is so
Yes.
great.
There were a number of questions that came in. That were, yeah, that's right. Yeah, there was some variation on like what will actually be in heaven. Not so much pearly gates, streets of gold stuff, but like what will we do? What will we be able to do? Is it anything that brings me joy now will bring me so much joy in heaven? But then on the flip side of that, the question, the dog biting question of, if there's one thing that brings me tons of joy in heaven, but someone else gets really offended by it, will that be like sort of that question of what will we be doing?
Mm-hmm.
Which there are a number of depictions throughout the scriptures that talk about we will be worshiping, but are we literally just sitting at the feet of God with our hands up for all eternity? Or what?
Good muscle tone.
Good muscle tone.
Yeah, I mean, Moses couldn't do it for very long. He couldn't keep his arms up for very long.
Oh, man.
He couldn't even make it a day.
That's true.
Eternity is a long arms up, people.
Eternity is a long time of holding your hands up.
So in the book of Revelation, right, there's a lot of different explanations or depictions of heaven, like you're talking about, Ben. There's talk about rest, which I know for a lot of parents or a lot of essential workers right now, rest sounds really appealing. There's talk of service, like you're using the gifts that God has given you. There's talk of like a feast, like there's going to be eating and not just like watching your carbs, but like feasting. There's going to be like fellowship, like meaningful relationships with other people. So, and certainly worship. I don't want to downplay that either. But I think that I just keep thinking back to Garden of Eden. What God intended was relationship, and what God intended was fun, and God wanted us to be creative. He wanted us to be hardworking in a way that is life-giving. Those sorts of things. And I one of my favorite observations in the Big God Story timeline is that it starts in a garden with like fig leaf clothing and animal skin clothing, and it ends in heaven where there's mansions and there's robes and there's gold and there's skyscrapers, right? Like it really, the Big God Story, even though when John wrote the book of Revelation, he did not know in the year 2020 we'd have cars that park themselves, right? Like he didn't know that. And yet God showed him this picture of heaven that would accommodate technology. So I think in that regard, I don't know about Fortnite specifically, but I think that I wouldn't be surprised at all if gamers have a place in heaven using the gifts that God has given them.
A place in a redeemed creation to avoid creation. Excellent.
Wow, tell us how you really feel about video games, John.
Oh, man.
You know,
this is why I don't do kids ministry.
Yeah. That's, you stay
sorry, kid.
Oh, the fact that Jesus talks about how our marriage relationships won't be like in heaven like they are now. I think the story of Jesus, where Jesus is asked about a woman marries 7 dudes marries a dude, he dies, and marries somebody else, and he dies, and whatnot. When she gets to heaven, who will her husband be? And Jesus essentially responds, "You're not thinking about this in the right way." He doesn't really explain it. He just says, "You're." He doesn't quite say that's a silly question, but he kind of says that's a silly question. But he sort of hints to our relationships aren't going to be that way. And so what sort of thoughts have you all had about that, circling around that? I mean, have you, John, you and I are married. Have you thought about the fact that when you're in heaven, your wife may not be your wife in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, you get pulled into this rabbit hole when you start trying to think about that. I mean, how many people do we know that have been married several times? Now, what happens? Now you end up with conflict in heaven. Now, how heavenly is that? So, I mean, I like Jesus' answer. Yeah, that's a dumb question. No. I'm not saying that. No. But I mean, I think we're trying to project our experience of time, experience, relationship, matter into a realm that may not necessarily follow the same rules. And there's an endless list of deep questions with no answers. I think we sort of need to try to not project how we live and operate in the world into however.
Well, like you said earlier, John, like their whole redemption, right? Like if God redeems relationships, the relationship itself would look different. I mean, I think about it from a single person, and I have to give the disclaimer that whole Jesus is my boyfriend theology, I'm not a fan, okay? But with that caveat being spoken, when Paul says that marriage is simply a metaphor for the love that exists between as his bride and Jesus as the bridegroom, to me, that's why marriage isn't as big of a deal in heaven, because marriage is a secondary relationship to the relationship we were created to have. So like when my brother got married and they went away on their honeymoon, they didn't care who was around them because they were finally together as husband and wife. And they were finally experiencing the relationship that they had been longing for. So when I think about my relationship with Jesus, yes, I'll be curious to see who is in heaven. I think I'll be surprised by the people who are and who are not. But at the same time, I'm going to be so ready to be with the one who is my creator and my God that it'll be like kind of like a honeymoon where, yeah, there will be people around me, but I will be so excited to finally be with the one for whom my soul longs for. That's going to be my focus, And I know plenty of people who are married and their marriages are far from perfect, and their relationship with Jesus is the primary relationship of their life, and their marriage is secondary. And I would say that's the order that God intended. But that's my thoughts as a single. I mean, I'm curious if you speak into that a little bit more, the two of you.
One of my favorite, which doesn't mean that it's accurate or true or at all. One of my favorite depictions of life in heaven, and I think it was C.S. Lewis. It may not have been, but it feels kind of C.S. Lewisy. Is that sometimes things just feel C.S. Lewisy.
That's an adjective, really.
Yeah, is that when we're in heaven, our life, like our life on earth, will feel like that dream I had this morning. Like I kind of remember it. I kind of remember it, and it wasn't horrible. Like it wasn't a nightmare, but that was a dream, and this is real life. And the manner of the relationships that I had with people in that dream were, not the same as my relationships with those people in real life. But it's not that I don't remember the dream, but it's that it was a dream, and this is real life. I don't know, just sort of that, imaginative theology stuff. That feels like it could possibly not be totally wrong. Sometimes that's just the best, sometimes it's just the best you got, is to come up with an answer that could possibly, might, maybe not be totally wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and to be fair, right? I mean, research into this is fiction.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking that in Narnia, I mean, there's this, great sort of image of, Aslan comes back and they save Narnia. And then what happened, that, the adventure just continues. So, I mean, as much as we can't look back and imagine what life really was before the fall, we can't really look forward and project what it is.
The question that was on my Facebook wall?
Yeah. You had a couple of them, and then I had a couple that were all very, very similar.
I just got some new questions texted to me.
Did you?
Let me find. I mean, it was essentially, will we be able to recognize people in heaven?
Yeah. Yes. We'll be able to recognize people in heaven. Will we realize that there are people that we cared about on earth that are in heaven?
Yes, exactly. Will we realize who is not there with us? And if we realize who is not there, I don't think we can be completely happy. Yeah.
Or I think one person phrased it as, if there are no tears in heaven, how does that, if my grandma isn't there with me, how can that be? And also there not be any tears in heaven.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think of that parable Jesus told of the rich man who was in hell, and he was like crying out to Abraham to talk to his loved ones, right? I mean, there's agony when you realize, oh my gosh, this whole time I've been choosing myself and not Jesus. Then you get to heaven and you choose hell. So like, that's like the tragedy, I think. But that's where I think that as much as God created us for community, and maybe this is too individualistic of me, I just think that question is downplaying what's going to happen when we see Jesus face to face, and how that's going to be like a total eclipse of the heart. It's going to be like a all-consuming thing. Like when, again, using the example of marriage or the metaphor, when a bride walks down the aisle, the bride isn't thinking about who's at her wedding and who isn't. The bride is thinking about the groom, right? And has her eyes fixed on the groom. And yeah, she might notice who are in the pews in the sanctuary, but she's there to get married to her groom. And so that's what I imagine it'll be like when we get to heaven is, yeah, we'll realize who's there and who isn't, but we're not in heaven for them. We're in heaven for our creator, like the Lord of our life,